to the Lars Larson Show, a brand new book about the adolescence and early life of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh paints him as a white, privileged, rich kid, and while it paints his latest accuser as just a struggling victim. But do the facts actually match up with what's going on in the book? Our friend Ann Coulter joins me now, syndicated columnist, and it's a great column you've written, and the author most recently of Resistance is Futile, How the Trump-Hating Left Lost Its Collective Mind. Annie, welcome back.
Good to be here, Lars Larson. I know it sounds like this is a little out of date, but this was a column I was meaning to get back to. The New York Times and these mainstream media reporters can't just drop defamation bombs on our newest Supreme Court justice and not expect me to bring it up occasionally. So this was a point I didn't get to at the time, and that's that discredited book, The Education of Brett Kavanaugh. They ran a long excerpt in the Times. And it was the one promoting Debbie Ramirez. Listeners will recall she was the one who didn't remember anything untoward Brett Kavanaugh had done to her while at Yale for more than 30 years, until he was nominated to the Supreme Court. And with the helpful encouragement of her liberal classmates, she spent 6 days assessing her memory, talking to an attorney, and suddenly remembered. That was the one where she said that he stuck his pecker in her face when she was, completely drunk, passed out drunk. But suddenly it all came back to her, 32, whatever it was, years later. But what I found, in addition to the obvious, incredibility of the story, the way that the authors were pushing this is believable, and you see this in a lot of cases. It isn't just this case, but this idea it's sort of a primitive Catholic idea that poverty and suffering is proof that of truth and honesty, wisdom, sainthood. So that's how they're pitching this Debbie Ramirez as the poor little Puerto Rican girl and working class background, surrounded by all these rich preppies, swatting her down with their polo mallets at Yale. Anyone who knows anything about Yale, this is how Hollywood in what's it called, Social Network portrays Harvard and Yale. Walk on to Harvard and Yale's campus, and it'll take you 6 years to find a wasp any place in sight. But this is the image. It's like it's a Hollywood version of the Ivy Leagues where everybody's walking around and they all went to prep schools. But on closer examination, and this goes more to just that the media are inveterate liars. Liberals are liars. We can't believe anything they say. This is just one example number 1 million of it. I looked up, for example, for one thing, Debbie Ramirez, half Puerto Rican. Her mother is French. She was a medical technician. Her father had a good job with a telephone company. She grew up in Shelton, Connecticut. And I noticed that the reporters kept using adjectives to make their case as opposed to facts. So it was supposed to be a working class town. I looked up, New York Times does these articles every once in a while about, towns in the New York metropolitan area. Yeah. So right about the time Debbie had graduated from high school, New York Times has an article, if you're thinking of living in Shelton. Okay, this is a town that has its own tennis courts, golf courses. According to it was zoned for 1 acre single family homes. No, I'm sorry, this is not a working class town. This is not a hard luck story. Their description of her, trying to contrast her background with, privilege, Brett Kavanaugh. They both went to private Catholic schools, but the authors described Brett's private Catholic school as, a privilege and elite private Catholic school. Oh, yeah, that sounds like a huge, huge difference. In the summer, Debbie, she was so poor, she had to work at a Carvel's ice cream store. Kavanaugh spent his summers mowing lawns. Yeah, that sounds a lot more pleasant, driving a thundering mowing machine around in the sweltering Virginia heat rather than scooping ice cream at a Carvel stand. But this is the kind, and there are many such examples I go through in my column. But this idea that liberals have that we won't look at the facts of the accusation, we will look at the accuser and the accused, and the accuser is woman. Ooh, that's good. That's always better than man.
Right.
Half Puerto Rican. That's better than white. White always bad. And wait, we went through, and female, of course, versus male, and female always trumps male. This is how liberals decide the truth. What are the characteristics, immutable characteristics of the accuser and the accused? And then I get around to wrapping it all up with something that I think is the most important issue, even in a way more than immigration. The media can't be trusted. Liberals lie. That's why I've noticed myself doing this, and I think your listeners will recognize what I'm talking about. You hear there's been a story, a shooting someplace, or, tax revolt in Virginia, or whatever it is. You don't read the CNN version of it. You don't read the New York Times version or whatever, the Seattle Intelligencer. No, you think, oh, there's a story here. I'll go online and look it up from a fairer source.
Yeah, because then you get good information, and you gotta check these things out. By the way, speaking of rich, privileged college campuses, you're on the campus of Berkeley tonight, right?
Yes, I am.
Are you wearing your battle armor for tonight's encounter?
No, I think I'll wear an attractive dress. I'll let the security, and actually, I will say, we'll see what happens. But Berkeley seems to be taking it very seriously this time. I think they were humiliated by what happened a couple of years ago when the president, their precious President Barack Obama, comes out and attacks Berkeley for the way they treated me last time. They have a lot to live down. So, I don't really pay attention to the security arrangements, but from what I understand, things will be very secure, and we'll have a nice speech, and I hope liberals show up so they can ask me questions. I used to give more college speeches than anyone else in the country, and it was a lot of fun. I had fun, liberals had fun, good time was had by all. So let's have at it.
Well, and I guess what I find kind of ironic is you're on one of the campuses. They just fought this fight with Harvard, and they've been fighting it elsewhere about whether or not they are deliberately discriminating against some people of color in this country, and then advantaging others. But you had to be in the right color group, because Berkeley, I'm told, if they let people on the Berkeley campus as students based purely on merit, the campus would be almost all Asian or largely Asian, but so they artificially limit them and say, oh, if you're Asian, then we're going to put limits on how many of you we can take because you're just too good, and the white kids are, too I guess, white, and then, of course, we have to advantage another group. It's really a screwy system, isn't it?
Yes, and it goes right back to the title of my column. We'll tell you who's privileged. well, and so you didn't see any of today's back and forth at the Schiff show, right? Well, I saw, the headlines, but if Trump goes down, and there's nothing we can do about it, whether for this or in the next election, I hope it is because he hired morons instead of the people he should have hired, or because he didn't keep his promises on immigration and immigrants vote against him. If he loses, I want it to be by that exact percentage. Oh, yeah, and also the felons that Jared released. Great job, Trump. Don't hire people who agree with you. And now, oh, what a surprise, you've been betrayed. Not that I think any of this matters. They've been making everyone, Fox News particularly, Fox News, a bunch of the Republicans, I suppose even Trump. It was always a dumb argument to say there was no quid pro quo. As I have said repeatedly in various interviews last week for Daily Caller and on C-SPAN, I've never said a quid pro quo is bad. Nope. I have never said this is a bad thing to do. That's what foreign policy is. Yep. We give all this foreign aid and exchange, we want something back. Obama's Iran deal was a quid pro quo. That's what it is. The president sets it. Why did they put themselves in this corner? But in the end, you can't be impeached just because you made a bad argument.
No, and the fact is that it's whether or not the quid pro quo was for an appropriate reason or an inappropriate. Appropriate is for the benefit of the United States. And they keep trying to make the argument that the only reason he went after corruption in Ukraine was because it was Joe Biden. Well, frankly...
Exactly.
You got to check out Anne's latest column and her book, Resistance is Futile. We'll be back in just a moment to talk about the next round of tax cuts coming. That, of course, is predicated on the re-election of Donald Trump.